All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, our panelists, members of the press, communication leaders from across the world, and in fact, Africa. Thank you for joining us for this webinar put together by Newmark, Nigeria. My name is Veronica Dan Ikroy, your moderator for today. You will agree with me that there is no better time to have these kinds of conversations with regards to what the theme for this webinar is about, talking about navigating crisis by communication, strategies for effective messaging in crisis. The world is in crisis. Businesses are facing challenges. And you will agree with me, like I mentioned earlier, that there is no better time to have these kinds of conversation so as to improve our capacity and the capacity of leaders in the communications industry to better handle situations like this when they find themselves in it. Thank you once again for giving us your time to share ideas, thoughts, and perhaps put together something that can help us better address situations we find ourselves as the days unfold. Today, we have a long line of panelists who are heavyweights in their own right to be sharing their experiences and thoughts with us. And I will begin first by introducing them. I will start with Gilbert Manirakiza. Forgive me. He is a brand leader, PR and strategic communications expert with the added advantage of multilingual communications, localization expertise. Prior to co-founding the Newmark Group, he had worked with the United Nations, the World Bank, the World Health Organization, the IMF, FAO, and the African Union, amongst other global organizations and brands, as a communications strategist to build multi-layered, multilingual, and multi-channel communications campaigns and systems. He has since lent his expertise and experience to local and global blue chips such as General Electric, Barclays Bank, the Rockefeller Foundation, governments of Japan, France, Dubai, and Singapore, just to name a few. In addition to providing media handling, etiquette, and public speaking training to Fortune 500 CEOs and senior executives, he has designed and moderated thought leadership panels during global and regional forums. Through Newmark, he has contributed to the evaluation of the PR industry in East Africa and indeed Africa by developing Newmark into a company that best excels at integrating digital, mobile, experiential, and creative brand communications into traditional PR. Having worked in over 20 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, he has an intimate knowledge of the opportunities, challenges, and complexities of the African marketplace, making him a key asset for all the clients that his team serve. He's a member of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations UK and the International Society of Sustainability Professionals, in addition to sitting on boards of several regional trade development initiatives and companies. He is an alumni of the University of Burundi, Cornell University, US, and the University of Cumbria, UK. Welcome, Gilbert, to this event this morning. Thank you so much for giving us your time. All right, the next speaker or panelist is Mabel Aditeye, who is a seasoned corporate communications and public relations expert with a decade of experience spanning multiple areas, including customer relationship marketing, PR, digital media marketing, brand management, event management, corporate affairs, and brand sustainability. She has led various high-profile communication initiatives for both local and international brands, focusing on areas such as corporate restructuring, product launches, crisis communication, B2B and B2C communications, and media relations. Mabel holds professional accreditations from the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, CIPR, UK, and the Nigerian Institute of Public Relations, NIPR, and certifications in digital marketing and strategy from institutions such as the Chartered Institute of Marketing, UK, and IESC Business School. She is also a member of the Public Relations and Communications Association, UK, and has obtained advanced digital certifications from Google. Currently, Mabel serves as the head brand and marketing communications, Wema Bank. She has worked with major brands including TVC Communications, Nine Mobile, Nokia, Microsoft, MasterCard, British Airways, Coca-Cola, Intel, and Guinness Nigeria PLC. Welcome, Mabel. It's good to have you join us. Edward Israel Ayide is a PR and marketing communications expert. He is the founder and head of communications and strategy at CapVM Solutions. He leads a team that provides strategic counsel and helps clients build trust, manage reputations, and create culturally connected brands. Welcome, Edward. Thank you so much. Onyinye Nwachukwu is next. She is a marketing and communications professional with expertise in enhancing organizational visibility through reputation management and B2B partnership strategies. Her career has evolved from managing social media for brands to overseeing comprehensive communication strategies, corporate events, media relations, and executive branding for C-suite leaders. Thank you, Onyinye, for giving us your time. You will agree with me that indeed we have industry heavyweights, and we will be having a holistic conversation today at the end of the day. But a few housekeeping. If you are not speaking, please mute your microphone. Also ensure you are in a quiet space because the webinar is being recorded. Panelists should please stick to the time allotted. It's an appeal. And please drop your questions in the Q&A section. We will attend to them as soon as we can. Now, if you're appreciating a point being made by a panelist, that is, if the panelist says something that strikes a chord, you can drop a line in the comment section. And then if you agree with me on this, I know we cannot do the aye, nay, as we do in our Senate or the House of Rep, but then you can give us a thumbs up if you agree with all the House rules and whatever we are discussing here. You can just drop a comment, a hat, just to encourage the panelists as we get along. So taking the stage now is Gilbert, who will be giving us his scene-setting remarks. Gilbert, is over to you.
Thank you very much, Veronica. I'm really feeling very privileged to be introduced by such an accomplished media professional and communication expert such as yourself. Thank you so much indeed. My role is very simple as I take the floor. It's really to set the scene for the conversation we have today. And that means I would like to make the case for crisis messaging, particularly for leaders and communication professionals. Sometimes we'll find it difficult to make leaders understand how important this particular topic is, but also for any other professional or entrepreneur or founder that wants to get a sense of why it's important to have the conversation we are having today. Some of us may remember recent crises, such as, for instance, the conflicts that erupted, pitting SARS against the rest of the country, really. And we know that some of the brands, private sector brands, were caught in the crosshairs of that particular conflict and crisis. And we also know of other situations whereby brands were caught in the crosshairs of things that they were not responsible for. But also sometimes there are crises that are stemming from action or inaction, error of commission or omission by a brand or a team in a given organization. And in some cases, we've seen that in Africa, generally speaking, but in Nigeria specifically speaking, the tendency has been to hide in the sand, to hide and try to ignore this particular crisis and let it blow over, so to speak. But I just want to break the news to particularly corporate leaders, but also other organizational leaders, that this is no longer going to be an option going forward. And why is that the case? It's simply because brand reputation and trust matter so much. Recent studies show that they account for up to 40% of market value of most companies. And therefore, it's just not an option for any brand to play that, to take that approach of wait for the crisis to blow over. They have to think about the drivers of trust, not just during that moment of crisis, but also way before. Because as they say, the best crisis management approach is the one that leads to the crisis never even happening in the first place. So that means that one has to think about the drivers of trust, which is a key driver of brand reputation. So things like integrity, reliability, expertise, social responsibility, customer experience, and reputation have to really be the foundation of the relationship that a brand will build with audiences and stakeholders in order to build the modicum of trust and reputation that will be very necessary when a crisis happens. But also this means that crisis messaging specifically must be a priority of leadership. And, not many people, especially not many corporate leaders, particularly at C-suite level, are always aware of what crisis communication entails. I mean, people have an idea of what a crisis is, but crisis communication is not always on the top of people's mindsets. So we can define it as a process that all organizations or brands should use and can use to protect or restore the reputation of their entity during a crisis or after a challenging public event. Now, when we go specifically to crisis messaging, we actually see that crisis messaging focuses on ensuring that there is clear, timely, and relevant information that is delivered to manage a crisis, reduce harm, guide actions, and maintain trust. However, theoretically speaking, that makes a lot of sense, but this is happening at an exceptional time right now. First of all, we are in a perma-crisis ecosystem where there is a crisis of some kind at any given point in time in our environments. And this is not necessarily a crisis that is internal, but it could be a crisis due to other factors. So, for example, we see that one of the things that has been a major trend is the erosion of trust. We have rising anger and groupthink, and we have very strong echo chambers rising in our various locations across Nigeria. We also have the reality of hyperconnectivity. I know that many of my co-panelists are going to be talking about this in detail. The other thing that we have to realize is that everyone now is a power broker, especially in an ecosystem where we have 24/7 hyper content news cycles that never stop, never sleep. Before we could go to sleep at the end of the day thinking, okay, I'm done with the day, I'll face this crisis tomorrow. But no, this is not what happens today, as we will hear more in this conversation. The other thing is that right now, brand reputation, trust, these are not just nice things to have. These are licenses to operate. Without these, it becomes very difficult to actually do business in Nigeria today, and indeed in Africa and across the world. Complexity is the other big feature that we have to talk about. Right now, we are talking about different types of crises: corporate, political crises, geopolitical crises, economic, individual crisis, different types of crises having, at the end of the day, one conversion point, which is the organization or the company that you may be working for, or in some cases, even the individual themselves can find themselves at the crosshairs of any of these typologies of crisis. But in addition to that, we see that sources of risk and crisis are multiple, and so are the propagation channels. We have crises that come outside of organizations and from inside of organizations. It's very often that you hear that an employee of XYZ company has been caught being involved in fraud. So the company and the brand may not necessarily have been responsible in any way, shape, or form, but the individual could be a source, or the individual inside could be a source of a risk event. And we also see situations whereby customers become sources of adverse reputational activities, and so on and so forth. And also the actors who are involved are becoming much more complex more than before. We see that we have now to think about leadership. I'm sure the colleagues in this panel will agree that there are many times when we would come up with a very nice statement for the CEO to read in the context of a crisis, but the legal team says, no, you can't say that. But we say, no, but we need to be authentic. We need to express empathy. We need to express what we feel, and in order to be emotionally connected to the people affected or concerned. But the legal team says no. So there is no. It's not just a case of one actor, one player. There are many other players we have to take into account in the broader context of crisis communications, and there are obviously external stakeholders that we have to think about. And I'm saying this to paint the picture of the fact that the management of a crisis communication campaign and the management or the approach to crisis messaging has to be a deliberate process. It can't be something that we leave to chance, or that we hope will somehow work out. We can just wake up one day, there's a crisis, and we come up with perfect messages that everyone is going to like. There has to be some serious thought into it way before any crisis happens. And that's where we have to start from the ground up, engaging stakeholders, having internal alignment, making sure that there is proactive planning and collaboration, scenario planning and things like that. We have to be very consistent and empathetic in messaging, not just during the crisis, because sometimes when the crisis happens, nothing that you have planned will actually play out the way you planned it. When you can have 1,000 crises that you have planned for, but the 1,001th crisis scenario is the one that ends up playing out. So it becomes very important for all the players internally to consider that sometimes consistency and empathy and what you are known for has to be what you use at the end of the day. And this is very important. And also things like timely communication, transparency in communication, these are very critical as well. The other thing is that crises are not created equal, and therefore calibration is very important. You have to think about what type of crisis we are dealing with. Not all crises require a response. Not all of them require responses by the CEO, for example. There are different types of crisis, different levels of crisis response, different types of spokespersons, and this means that it has to be thought through systematically. If it's an emerging issue, if it's a significant issue, if it's at crisis level, you have to be able to address the messages that you have come up with to the relevant people through the right spokespersons. And this is something that I believe we'll talk about as well. Crisis messaging essentially is where the rubber meets the road. Whether you're talking about the messaging framework that entails what we famously refer to as the 3 R's, or whether you're talking about the storytelling framework, either way, this is what your publics will consume. Obviously, you can do all the planning, but if you fail at crisis messaging, it becomes extremely difficult to recover as a brand. And even if you recover, you actually have to do a lot of work to deal with the mistakes that come from an inaccurate crisis messaging response. So in this case, we will see that it's very important to invest time in a proper messaging framework. I'm coming to the conclusion of my segment by saying that every brand and every communicator has to think about the fundamentals as well. Sometimes we think that being very good at crisis communications is by itself sufficient. But I would like to say that it is important, but it's also very important to think about some of the things that lead to crisis in the first place. In many cases, crises come because maybe there is no culture that allows people to escalate and point out a potential issue or potential crisis within the ecosystem of an organization or an entity, which means that at the core of the ecosystem, there needs to be a crisis-friendly culture as a fundamental building block for an organization. So any CEO should constantly check whether they will be able to catch a crisis before it actually becomes one and they need to react to it with communications and messaging. Clarity of identity and purpose, this is another fundamental building block, because without a strong identity and purpose that the various stakeholders can associate the organization with, it will be difficult to go back to them and try to convince them that one is good and is sincere in their messaging around the crisis when that identity and purpose has not been articulated fundamentally and strongly and consistently as they should do. What we call risk and crisis governance is very important as well, because there has to be a cascade of processes. And my colleagues and co-panelists will talk about this, the awareness, the training that goes into this. Over the last 14 years, the Newmark Group has been doing a lot of training with many of our clients just to make sure that the governance is right, the crisis governance is calibrated correctly, and that the awareness across the board is created over time, and that also the key players in the response is the crisis communications response are trained properly and at the right level for them to play their role. And finally, stakeholder outreach and engagement is absolutely critical. And we are going to talk about this in more detail along this panel session. I'll stop there, Veronica, so that I give everyone a chance to come in and build on this. But I thought these are important elements that we should build on as we go into this conversation. Thank you very much. Back to you, Veronica.
Absolutely, Gilbert. Thank you so much for all of those details that you gave. My note is almost filled right now because there's so much to unpack from all that you have said. And I know that 10 minutes is going to be enough for you, but you were able to manage through beyond 10 minutes, so to speak. Thank you so much. One of the key highlights of your speech is that hiding your head in the sand is no longer acceptable because brand trust and reputation matter. That's one pointer for me. And I would say Gilbert 2024. That's the quote for the year for brands. And I believe that that is very instructive. And then you talked about the matter of if you fail in crisis messaging, it will be difficult to recover as a brand. And that's true. And the next person I'm going to call is one of the persons that helped TVC navigate through the murky waters of the NSAS 2020 situation that the organization found itself at the time. Although she no longer works for TVC, but we cannot forget what she did during that period, and that is Mabel Adeteye. It's over to you now, Mabel. Mabel, are you there? Okay. I guess while we wait for Mabel, I will be forced to call up now Edward. Edward will be speaking with us on the changing times and the changing landscape when it comes to messaging in a crisis situation, a situation where a lot of things are happening all at once. Everybody seems to have access to information, but then you see the situation of disinformation, misinformation, fake news, and the likes. But Edward will help us know how organizations can navigate through these times or this changing landscape. Edward, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much, everyone, for joining the session. I think Gilbert already laid the groundwork for what I think would be a very interesting conversation today. Just going to share my slides right now. So while I speak on something that I think is very, very critical when managing crisis, which is mastering the message during crisis, especially in the age of misinformation. I think one critical thing we need to understand in the age we found ourselves is the fact that there's increased speed at which news breaks these days. Digital age, of course, has brought new opportunities and new challenges in terms of managing crisis. There was a time when news cycles were dependent on almost people moving from place to place, or it would take maybe about 24 hours for something to get to print or to broadcast. Nowadays, the digital age has brought with it increased speed, so information breaks in real time, and also information is breaking in one part of the world while you're sleeping, and then before you wake up, stuff has already gone south. There's also the fact that we're in an age where trust is broken. Institutions and governments have become less accountable. Fake news has become the order of the day as well. Rumors, false narratives, especially manipulated content, and now that we have
Edward, we
artificial
can't hear you.
intelligence, and even prior to
Please
that.
check your device. Great. Okay. Can you say
Can
something?
you hear me now?
Yes, yes,
You can hear me now?
yes.
Okay, great. Like I was saying, we're also in an era where fake news has become the order of the day, manipulated content, deep fakes, and so on and so forth. This kind of content has become the order of the day, and something that brands have also been exposed to. Last but not the least, of course, is the importance of brands being proactive in their communication. Uh, Given this background, it has become more critical than ever for brands to be the captains of their own ship and ensure that they are in control of the narrative that is being put out about them. And why messaging matters is that um, we, in a time of crisis, you do need clarity in chaos. So you need to be clear, to be concise, to share accurate information, to share detailed information, so that you're able to weather the storm. You're able to set the record straight, and you're also able to put things in perspective. Of course, the right messaging also helps you to build confidence. It also make sure that you're able to address concerns, you're able to reduce anxiety from stakeholders, which could be employees, which could be investors, partners, or even from members of the media. And then, most importantly, guides informed action from members of your team and within your ecosystem. And I think the most important part of it all is that it enables you to control the narrative, helps you to be in charge, because, like I mentioned earlier, the digital era has brought with it a lot of players into the communication cycle. So you find that customers, you find that social media users can spread narratives about your brand, which could come from either a place of malice or from a place of disappointment in maybe a service that you have rendered to them. But it's all very, very important for you to control the narrative, which is why the right messaging is very, very important and helps organization to weather this storm. And just to dive a bit into what are some essentials for crafting messages that resonate during a time of crisis is you need to be transparent and accurate. I've personally seen a lot of times, and this is based on my experience working on some public sector campaigns. I've seen a period of time when people want to muddy the waters. So a crisis has happened, and instead of addressing that crisis head on or effectively, people then try to muddy the waters. They then try to throw other things into the mix. They then try to introduce other conversations into the mix just to muddy the waters and make sure that people then divert their attention. They understand, or maybe people try to deflect. But I don't think those kind of strategies are effective in the long run. I don't think they help you to move from a place of crisis to rebuilding trust. Accuracy and transparency is very, very important. Make sure that your facts are well checked and then verified. Very, very important as you're managing to craft messages in a time of crisis. And then, of course, clarity as well. Use plain languages. Another thing that I've seen people do a lot of time, especially in some organizations or some brands or some sectors that are a bit specialized, is to use a lot of verbose language, is to use a lot of technical language to say a lot without actually saying anything. So I think it's also very, very important for brands to be clear, to avoid jargon and focus on the key messages and focus on the key takeaways. What do you want the audience or the stakeholders to take away from that message or from that communication? Focus strictly on it and make sure that these things are clear and devoid of jargon. Then consistency as well, like what are we saying and how consistently are we saying it? So it's one thing to say one thing on one platform and then go and say something else on another platform. So you get your spokespeople to go on TV and then they're on the offensive on TV or radio, but on your social media, you're trying to be conciliatory and all of that because you're afraid that social media is where the problem could escalate. So I think it's important for brands to be consistent as well, like identify your key messages and then agree on that and coach your key people who are going to be addressing the public, either on traditional media, on digital media, to stay on message and be consistent across all channels and across all spokespeople. Then very important as well is empathy. When people say they've been hurt, when people say they've been like when people say they've been attacked or something happened, a client buys something from you and maybe for instance it's a food chain and then they have food poisoning. It's important to also be empathetic, not to say, oh, it's a competitor that is trying to create a crisis for us. Of course, I've also seen that happen where brands create crisis for other brands. But even in situations like that, I think it's very, very important for brands to acknowledge concerns, to address them, and to show genuine care, to show that they are actively seeking to resolve that crisis and that they understand what the person is going through or what the various stakeholders could be going through. So, for instance, it's not to say if there was an oil spill in the community in the Niger Delta, it's not to say that, oh, this is just members of the community trying to get more money out of our pockets. It's to actually ensure that that oil spill is investigated and then you find ways to resolve that issue and to show that you understand that this may have impacted the lives of people. In terms of managing crisis as well, and in crafting messages that are very, very effective, we also need to go back to the beginning, which is that managing crisis needs to be very, very proactive. Like I've mentioned earlier on, we're in a particular era where news has become very volatile. So there's some strategies that there's some things that need to be done ahead of time to ensure that even when crisis breaks, you're able to manage things more effectively. And one of them is to ensure that you have a strong brand voice and communication style that is distinct, such that in situations where someone tries to create maybe a deep fake or maybe create a message on your behalf and spread it as you, it's easy for people to be able to see that, okay, fine, this is not the way these people usually talk. These are not the kind of things that they share. Uh, Another thing is to ensure that you have strong stakeholder relationships. And this, of course, may be even with media, this may be with regulators within your industry. This may also be with other players within your industry who can come together and rally around you in a moment of crisis. I think another thing that we need to do is to also have what we call in the industry olden statements. But of course, every stage potential crisis that may happen and have different scenarios and then have olden statements or pre-approved messages that can go out in terms of crisis. Then last but not the least is, like I also mentioned earlier, is to ensure that your spokespeople are well trained and they can stay on message and they can consistently address things as are needed. I think one other thing that we need to also do in this era of digital information is to constantly monitor social media. Social media has become the battleground, if I may call it that. It has become the battleground of a lot of communication these days. While traditional media is still very effective, it's still very, very important, social media has become the battleground where information is broken, where information is made, where information is distorted, even in some cases. So very, very important for brands to continue to monitor social media, also to be able to respond quickly and accurately to information. And of course, this relies heavily on point one, which is monitoring your brand as much as possible. And it's not just monitoring your brand on social media. There's also tools that you can use like Brand24, like Google Alerts, and so on and so forth that just help you to monitor your brand and see what people are saying about your brand online. Then, of course, make sure that you're not silent about your brand. Provide regular updates. Then, of course, also provide this information in various forms, in video, text, infographics, so you're able to address different people based on their consumption patterns. And yes, so coming to a point where crisis has now happened, um, very important for us to then correct things, which is identify and track this information. Make sure that you have make sure you have a clear grasp of what is being said, what is being advanced in the public space, and be able to track them accurately. Then, of course, make sure that you're able to respond to false claims with credible sources and evidence. We had a client recently who had gone through this kind of crisis, and there was just a lot of false news that was being spread about them online. And for a long time, they were quiet because they didn't know what to do, and that allowed the news to spread. But one of the things we advised them to do was to refute these things because they are not true, and provide the situation of things like these are documents, these are things that you have done in the past that show that these things that are being said about you are not real. And then, of course, make sure that this correct information is being amplified as much as possible through the same channels where this false news has been spread. Then, of course, also important to work with influencers. And when I say influencers here, doesn't necessarily have to be influencers in the mode of it. It could also be influencers within your industry. It could be experts within your industry. It could be a professor in a university who could help you spread some light and maybe something that has happened in the banking sector, or maybe in the education sector or real estate, who can bring some more context into the situation. Um, then most importantly as well, of course, they say private victories precede public victories, is also the fact that there needs to be internal alignment. I think Gilbert mentioned this earlier on, which is that there needs to be like a culture internally that allows for people to manage crisis effectively. And some of these, like I've identified here, is making sure that internal communication, employees are informed as much as possible, so that people do not also take what is being said out there and then use it to create a very bad working environment for other people. Also ensure that there's clear guidelines for communicating to employees during a time of crisis, assuage their concerns, make sure that they are confident to continue to come to work and they do not feel like they're part of a bad organization. Provide regular updates and talking points to your internal stakeholders. And this also could be that you're keeping them up to date with what is being done to manage the crisis. And then even internal channels, like what are people saying internally? What are people saying to other colleagues, just to ensure that people are people have the right message and can communicate accurately with information. And then, of course, let's not forget the place of technology in all of this. Need to analyze the impact, track media coverage. Like I mentioned earlier, there's so many tools. There's Brand24. There's even Google Alerts, and then of course so many other tools to track social media, from Hootsuite to at times it's just even checking the social media pages, like just the traditional way of checking comments and all of that, analyzing audience sentiments, what are people saying, making sure that you have more positives and maybe even neutral compared to negatives, and making sure that those negatives are addressed and identified and people can fix them. Then of course surveys are also very, very important. Focus groups, online surveys. There's so many tools these days to use for online surveys that you can ask around within the organization or outside the organization. Then of course using data to refine messaging and communication strategies as much as possible. I think to conclude, it's just three things for me, which is that it's very, very important to master your messages, to have effective messaging when you're navigating the challenges of a digital age. And then it's also important for us to build trust. We must prioritize accuracy, clarity, consistency, and empathy as we seek to protect our reputation. And then we must also continue to monitor, to analyze, and adapt to the ever-evolving information landscape that we found ourselves in. I think that's it from me. Thank you very much.
If you'll allow me, I would like to go ahead and introduce our next speaker. Mabel, would you be willing and able to take us through your insights? And before you come in, I just want to thank you, Edward, for such an insightful presentation. And I'm sure it's going to lay some good groundwork for the conversation that Mabel is going to take us through. So Mabel, if you'll kindly please come in and take us through your presentation.
Thank you so much, Gilbert. Thank you for having me. I just quickly want to share my screen.
Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
It's coming up. Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, I'm trying to put it in. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be on this conversation today. Crisis communication is something that I've done over time in my over 15 years of career. And for me, it is very, very important as communication expert that we understand what crisis communication, and I think that the previous speakers have done justice to explain what it is, the importance and all of that. But I'm going to be looking at it from perspective of corporate communication, what our role is in crisis management, what are the things that we do, how do we manage, and as we go along, I would dive into the financial sector as the case study to buttress my point. But when we talk about corporate communications role in crisis management, it is important that we understand that our responsibilities as corporate communication expert covers four major activities or areas where we have to be constantly ready. There are crises that comes that you don't prepare for them. You don't prepare for them, and there are crises that comes based on you preempting what would happen in terms of whatever conversations or activities that are going on. And then how do you respond to them? What are the messaging that you craft? How do you manage stakeholders? What are the things that you do? What are the channels that you use to communicate and to manage the crisis? And then we move on to how do we recover what exactly? Is it loss in reputation? Is it loss in trust? Is a loss in customer base? It is very, very important as corporate communication expert to understand that our role covers all of these when we handle and manage crisis. And then the next thing would be restoring whatever it is that has been lost. A lot of brands, when crises happen, it takes forever, and some even don't find their feet back up after the crisis. So it is important as corporate communication expert that I won't bore you with my profile. So crisis communication in banking, what I've done is to break it into two perspectives, and that is retail banking, corporate and investment banking. When Gilbert was talking, one major thing that I was able to pick out of your his presentation was trust. trust is very, very important in crisis management. And as corporate communication expert working in the banking industry, in the financial industry, trust is something that can make or mar your business. Here, you have to ensure that you are able to manage your stakeholders effectively. When we talk about retail banking, crisis in public trust can impact your the contribution from being a systematic risk to the wider financial perspective of the business. And for corporate and investment banking, the ability to be able to provide complex messaging to high-stake financial stakeholders that you have. You have people who have invested their fund, who are like your major stakeholders in keeping the business. So you need their trust to be able to survive when crisis is ongoing in the financial industry. Then when we talk about crisis in the banking industry, there are two folds in managing crisis. And what I have done is I broke them down into two areas. The first is shaping response based on containing and remedying the impact on stakeholders. There are stakeholders from your employees to your customers, to your clients, to your senior management. How do you shape the responses that you give to them? They are different in their own space. They are different in what they're looking out for as a stakeholder in your business. And then the next thing would be preventing the erosion of trust with clients, counterparts, and regulators. In the financial industry, regulators play is an industry that I love because regulators play a lot of role in ensuring that customers' funds are secured. Financial institutions don't just take some decisions as they want. So you need to ensure that you are able to manage that trust that your regulators have for your organization when crises happen. So preventing the erosion of trust with clients, counterparts, and regulators during crisis management is very, very important if truly you want to sustain the business. And there are some rules on the crisis communication as corporate communications expert. One is you have to respect the role of media. We can't, even on this call today, we can't overemphasize the importance of media when it comes to crisis communication. So I have worked in the media space. I have some media background experience, and I understand the power of using both the traditional media, but the new media, TV, print, to manage your story, your narrative. How do you communicate? What are the messaging that you give to the traditional media? What are the messaging that you give to the new media? But one thing you have to understand is even with the different styles and way to communicate with them, the messaging must be the same. The messaging must be accurate. The messaging must be clear, because there are customers, there are audiences who have access to all of these channels, but the way they want to consume their communications on those channels are different. So you need to understand the role of media in managing it, in communicating your message to them, in helping you to drive your narrative, in helping you to shape that behavioral perspective that you want from your audience. Another thing is you need to communicate to your shareholders, communicate to your stand to your employees, communicate to your stand to your customers, communicate to your stand to your regulators. You need to constantly communicate when crisis is happening, and that's because when you fail to come out and share your own side of the story. I mean, when I go further, I would also explain where, yes, it's not every time that you communicate, but even when you're silent from your own perspective, you can have third party help you drive the narrative that you want to communicate. But the most important thing is communicate as much as you can to all your stakeholders, from customers to employees to shareholders to regulators and clients, and take responsibility. Take responsibility, share your own story. Take responsibility because you understand the situation as better than anyone. You have the one in the situation, so you must be able to take responsibility of your own side of the story, responsibilities based on how it impacts your customers, responsibilities on how it impacts your employees, responsibilities on how it impacts the industry as a whole, and then centralize your information. I'd mentioned something around, yes, you can use different communication channels to communicate, but your messaging must be accurate. Your messaging must be the same. Your messaging must be, must be accurate. It must be the same thing so that people understand that you are trustworthy. Because when crisis happens, if you're not careful, that is when you lose your trust from your stakeholders. So you must be able to centralize your communication and ensure that all of the people you want to communicate to can have access to that particular thing that you want them to understand. Then establish a crisis communication team. As corporate communication experts, either crisis is going to come tomorrow, it's not going to come tomorrow. Crisis communication team is very, very important for you to establish. From your internal team members, employee working in that particular department in the organization, to senior management team, to other interdepartmental businesses that you have in the organization. Let me use banking industry as an example. So as corporate communication departments, you will have finance that would send their quarterly financial report, a monthly financial report. What are the reports saying? Who is going to be responsible for what? What is the narrative around this? You have the IT guys that you need to engage with. You have the executive management team that you need to be able to engage. So who is saying what on what particular thing at what particular stage? So that team must be well established and everybody understand their responsibilities and what is expected of them. And then communicate with employees. Employees, I can't overemphasize this, and that's because your employees would go places where your voice can't even get to. Your employees would reach places where your news releases won't get to. They have their own audience, they have their own niche, they have their own family, they have their own friends. And what they say tend to impact in your crisis management tactics. So you must be able to communicate in clear terms to your employees where they understand what the true picture is. What should you say here? What should you do here? This is the impact. So you must be able to communicate with. And I even say to people that your employees should be your first call in terms of engagement, where you give them the true picture, because you know that maybe I worked in an organization and she's a friend to somebody can reach out to you to ask you one or two questions about, during crisis. But what is important is if your crisis departments or corporate communications department have been able to engage you, where they share the narrative that they want you to project, that helps you to manage crisis effectively. And the last thing is third-party support. I'd mentioned it earlier that when you're communicating, it doesn't necessarily have to be your voice alone. You have third party that you can work with to be able to communicate. And I think Edward mentioned that during his presentation, where you use influencers based on the conversation that is being discussed, that particular, from technical to IT to brands, whatever it is, you have third party that you can lean on to be able to drive that. And in assessing crisis, before you take a particular action, you must be able to assess the crisis. In financial institution, it's not a try and error thing. You can't have crisis and then you're running everywhere. You must first, as a corporate communication expert, be able to analyze the crisis. What is the true picture? What is this crisis about? Who is going to be impacted? We've been able to verify it. What are the legal implications? I think Edward mentioned that we have a lot of back and forth with other departments where corporate communications, we're talking about what the media would say, what the media would ask, what the consumer would say, what the customers would want. And legal is saying that, oh, no, we might have some legal implication if you go this way. We might have some legal implication if we go that. So that having that understanding from brands and communication perspective and legal perspective is very, very important. We even go as far as compliance, where you check with compliance team to understand what are the regulatory implications to this. If we say this is there, and because you have the customer that you're trying to deal with, they're trying to manage, You have legal that you're trying to manage, which is across board. And then you have regulators in your industry where compliance would help you guys. So you bring all of that stakeholders together to be able to assess that what level of resources would be required to manage the crisis. Do I need a smaller team? Do I need a bigger team? Is this something that I can manage internally in my financial institution, or do I need to engage third party? Do I need to use media? Do I need to? So you need to be able to review and assess the level of resources that you need to be able to manage that. What is the impact? What is the impact to your customer? What is the impact to your industry? What is the impact to your employees? What is the impact to your stakeholders? What is the impact? It is very, very important, especially in the financial industry, that you assess the impact of the crisis before you jump into your action. And then impact to who? What is the degree? Impact to my customer. Is it are these customers my major shareholders? Are they just my everyday customers? Are they customers in my investment banking sector? Are they customers in my corporate banking sector? Are they customers in my retail banking? Are they customers on social media? So you must be able to access that and review that. That largely even gives you an understanding of who should you engage directly first. I'll give you a typical example and use one crisis that I've managed before, where it involves the entire business. However, we needed to first understand review who will be impacted. We're talking about funding, and we have a lot of people who have invested on that particular area of the business. What we did was to first communicate, have calls to those major shareholders where we discuss with them, it's not a true picture. This is what is happening. We've done our research. This is the person behind this. This is the action that we're taking. And what that does for us is it gave us another 24 to 48 hours to be able to go head on to tackle the crisis itself. But what we did was to first engage the people that will be impacted. And then they'll be impacted because it will in return impact the business. And that is what is very important for you to access the crisis. And here, the to-dos when you're managing crisis. As corporate communication expert, when you're working in the financial industry, because of the rate of the crisis that comes, there's no particular industry that is exempted from crisis. But in financial institution, I think because of the finance money that is in there, the industry is prone to crisis. But as an expert, you must be able to think on your feet. You must be able to access. Accessing for me is very, very key. You must be able to analyze. If you cannot analyze your crisis, you will get stuck. You would make use of the whole template that you used last month for a crisis that probably just require you to call shareholders. You will get stuck where crisis is just employees that can help you manage that. And then you must be able to craft your messaging. Messaging that is clear, messaging that is direct, messaging that is the same, but communicated to your audiences in the language, in the platform that you want you to communicate with them. I use an engagement that we had with some shareholders as an example, and that's because that's the first thing that we need to do, because we're able to access the impact of this particular crisis. At the end of the day, what will happen? What will be impacted? A lot of funds will be moved. So what are we doing? And that's why we had to go right on that. Right. And engage early. Engagement early is very, very important. You must be able to engage early once you're done with your accessing the crisis. And then monitor feedback. And I think Edward mentioned that around monitoring feedback. When you're monitoring feedback, you must ensure that you are constant, you are engaging in it back to back. Adjust your strategy. I don't believe that there is one strategy fit all when it comes to crisis management. I've managed crises across various industries, from banking to telco to aviation to technology, and I can tell you for a fact that there is no one strategy fits all. Yes, you can have your crisis communication plan, but you must be able to adjust by monitoring and then adapting as the situation arises. I'm sure that my time has gone. And the last thing on my sheet is just building and rebuilding. Rebuilding the trust. After managing all of this, it is important that we then look at how do I rebuild the trust. In rebuilding the trust, there must be transparency, there must be accountability, there must be ongoing engagement with all of the stakeholders that you have identified. What are the steps that you're taking to prevent similar issues from happening in the future? How do you improve based on the learnings that you've seen in the trend? And then consistent and honest communication, post-crisis communication is very, very important. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. I know there's so much you have to share because of your wealth of experience in the industry. And 10 minutes is not enough for you to share. And even 20 minutes is not even enough, or even an hour. But then for those who are present at this webinar, all of the slides will be sent to you so you can read through and get any information you need. Thank you so much, Mabel, for that insightful and brilliant session that you just had. I believe that so much to unpack from it. Unfortunately, I had a crisis to deal with, and so I had to network threw me out, and we had to sort ourselves. And now I'm back from resolving the crisis. All right. Next up is Onyinyechi Nwachukwu, who will be focusing on the role of PR and strategic communication in crisis management. She will be giving us insight on the pivotal role in managing crisis. She will also explore how digital platforms and PR strategies can be used to shape public perception. Onyinye, is over to you now.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. Can everyone hear me? Can I see
Absolutely,
some reactions? Wonderful. Okay, so in between Gilbert and Mabel, I feel like the entire topics to giving to everyone had been covered. So I'm going to focus on giving examples or showing relatable examples that you can relate to, crises that you have seen in the digital era that has happened on social media and has blown into full scale on social media that you can relate to, and we can sort of talk about practical responses, what could have been done, what was done, how the damage was measured, and stuff like that. So yeah, today my topic is the role of PR and strategic communication in crisis management. So first of all, about me, but I have just 10 minutes, but let's just talk a little about me. I tell brand stories, I collect the data from PR and marketing efforts, and create strategies that help businesses achieve their growth goal. Introduction. A single crisis can damage a company's reputation irreparably. For case study here, I have a risk score. Now, when I was putting this slide together, I tried to, come up with an example that everybody can relate to. And all the case studies I knew were not very relatable. And so I asked my brother. He does not work in PR, he doesn't work in marketing, nothing. And I asked a simple question. Can you remember any company that they dragged on social media and it ended up affecting them very well? And my brother just said, oh, that Erisco tomato paste, I don't see it anywhere again. And I was like, oh, that's a very, very relatable example. Everyone can remember it. Everybody was aware of the case when it was happening. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. My mother knows about the case, and she doesn't even use social media that well. Everybody knows. So imagine what had happened to that brand. I would not buy a tomato paste or any product from Erisco if I see it in the market. I know a couple of people who would never do that. Now that is a damage that would cost so much more to fix than it would have cost to the money spent in the whole fiasco. It will still cost much more. If they should begin reputation reparation now, it would cost so much more, from media engagements to, it would cost so much more to fix than it had cost so far. How businesses use PR. Remember, the topic is how PR can help can work with strategic communication, how PR and strategic communication can help organizations manage crisis. But to understand how crisis can be managed using PR, let's go back to talking how organizations in general use PR. Public relations is the practice of managing and disseminating information to the public in order to influence their perception. If an organization hires a PR agency now, let's say organization about to launch, and they say, oh, we want to engage you for like a year or 2 years or 3 years to help us build our reputation, tell stories about our brand, craft a storyline for our brand. What they are doing is they are trying to influence the public perception of their brand. They're trying to say, okay, they're trying to own their own story. They want you to be known for something. And that's where PR comes in. PR helps organizations be known for something. They help you craft your identity. Now, crisis damages reputation, which is the opposite of what PR does. Now, PR on one hand builds reputation, and then crisis damages the reputation. So you see, like, they're not together. They're opposites of the same angle, of the same cards, two sides of a coin. Yep. And if what is being affected by crisis is reputation, it's not the business, it's not exactly, or the direct effect is not the sales, the direct effect is not business operations. What is being affected by crisis is often the reputation of the brand. That, of course, PR can fix, or using PR strategies, the same strategies that you're using to build the reputation, you can now apply it to fixing that reputation. Now let's go back to the Erisco case. My topic today is focusing on the digital space. So Erisco is a perfect case study. Now imagine after the young lady who uploaded her review, imagine after she had uploaded that review and said, oh, this tomato paste has so much sugar, I don't advise anyone to use it. And then the brand at that time, knowing that the review she gave was for the ketchup variant of the tomato paste and not the cooking paste version, had come out and used that opportunity to compare and contrast the two products, and said, taught people how to use the one and how to use the other. I believe that would have been an amazing option, or an amazing opportunity for people to remember that, oh, this brand has a ketchup variant. It's probably more affordable than the one we all use. Let's try it out. Let's see if we can add it to breakfast options, to sandwiches, to our shawarmas, things you use the ketchup for. If they had, use that opportunity instead of trying to fight her, or use that opportunity to compare and contrast the two products, they would have now used that opportunity for the crisis to further build their image. Crisis damages reputation. By allowing that crisis, that review, to blow up more than, very few people saw it when it happened. A lot of people didn't see the review. Up until the case of the police getting involved, a lot of people did not know about it. So of course, a lot of people could not have known that any damage was done at all until it was blown out of proportion. Now, these days, it is now the feelings people have towards the brand has been damaged. It is not something that people do not care nicely for the brand. They wouldn't want to purchase it, or wouldn't want to be affiliated with it. Now, understanding crisis management. Sometimes what brands see as crisis isn't exactly crisis. It could be a complaint. It could be like a review from a customer that can be used positively, not blown out of proportion, or not starting to fight. So understanding crisis management, understanding what to do when you're being faced with crisis, starts from understanding the context of the crisis. So for crisis managers, there is a response. The first caveat is response. Are we responding to the crisis? What type of response should be given? I love that Mabel mentioned that not all crises warrant a response. Not all feedback from customers warrant a response. Sometimes I'll use the banks. There's an automated message. If you complain on that popular post on Twitter, there's an automated messages where the banks say, oh, we are sending a message to you in your inbox. No need for leaving it there. If people come under that comment and see everybody's complaining about your brand and nobody's saying anything, it shows that, oh, your brand is not attentive. But by the time that automated responses are there, there's no need to publish a press release because someone is making a complaint. There's no need to hire an influencer to say, oh, this is down, or this bank is. There's no need for an overblown response. A simple comment to to the that the person has dropped, solve that immediately. When you're handling crisis, you should think of what my response is, and the response should be suited to the context of that crisis. Now, focus on minimizing damage. There's no need to blow up things out of proportion. If you do not want to use that crisis as an opportunity to inform or to educate people about your brand, try and make sure that people do not know about it. Minimize damage immediately. If it's coming from one customer or from one client, attend to it immediately. If it is an inbox, if it is an internal issue, address the internal issue and let the public know about it. Then repairing your reputation. If it has blown out of proportion, let me use a different example. Earlier this year, there was on Twitter, there was a company that was called out for owing salaries for a little over a year, or for almost 18 months. Yeah. And as Nigerians, for a private company, it is difficult to see, especially for a new company, it's difficult to see people working for companies and they be owed salaries for 16 months. That is very difficult to see. So what should the organization have done when they are being called out for being owed salary for 16 months? If the backstory or the reports that they released showed that this is something that had been happening internally for a minute before it blew up. So that means this crisis was first began inside the organization. How would they have handled that without it growing to affecting their reputation in the public view? Since it began internally, a great way to have addressed it was to engage the internal stakeholders, send a message to them, let them know what is going on, inform them. Probably that would have been a great way for them to learn about crisis, how it affects the brand image, how it affects their earning, how it affects the employees of the company, what the company is doing to navigate that particular situation and handle it. Yeah. For us, and handle it internally. That way, there's no way that it would blow out of proportion, and there will be hardly any need to repair reputation out in the eyes of the general public. It would have been repairing reputation, building trust among their internal staff. Minimal, no need to blow it up. When you're managing a crisis, find ways to ensure that the damage is minimal. If it's happening internally, you keep it internally. Now, I have affected, responding to the affected party. If a complaint is done by a single person for a single issue, please find a way or ensure that your response is the person who is making the complaint is responded to personally. Yeah, again, the bank comments on that post on Twitter. Now, minimizing damage, you have your primary stakeholders. If it is a crisis that has grown to a level where damage can already be noticed, but it can be done, have your primary stakeholders back to their risk or issue. If a post has gone out where your customers are being advised to not purchase your product, a good example for a way to minimize damage in that situation is to compare and contrast the two products. Or this product is for breakfast use, or it's not for cooking, and this is a sauce, and this one is the one we use for cooking. And then when repairing your reputation, the media, influencers, they are your best friends, your own media campaigns that you engage on. These are tools, these are ways PR can help you repair your reputation. Now, back to handling crisis, your organization's messaging. When you are now dealing with the crisis, it's important for your communication to be clear. People should not come to several conclusions from the message you put out. When you put out a message, it should be understood by everybody. It should be clear. It should be direct to the point. You should go straight to the point. Now, it might not be necessary for you to give out so much information, but still, whatever information you're putting out must be easy to understand, clear, and must address the issue. Now, empathetic leadership is very important. In the event that your leaders are involved in the crisis, or in the event where the crisis can be mitigated by having your leaders speak to the situation. It's important for your messaging to be empathetic, and you should show that whatever damage has been done by your organization can be, it's not being looked over. Now,
Right.
prompt. Digital age, it's important that you are prompt with your messaging. Social media travels very fast, but your organization can travel faster by staying on top of the news and ensuring that you lead the narrative. Also be accountable, ensure that change that hasn't taken place is contained in that messaging.
All right.
Okay, so I have mentioned news travels fast. Preparation is half the job. Internal trainings, crisis communications preparation is half the job. Context is key. Ensure you address the context and send a prepared, unified messaging.
All right.
Okay.
Yes.
That's it.
Quickly. All right. Thank you, Onyinye.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That was also a brilliant one there. I know there's so much to be said, but time is not our friend as it is, and there's still a lot to be said. But one thread that runs through the whole conversation we've had with regards to messaging in a time of crisis is a matter of clarity, is a matter of trust, the matter of promptness and being proactive, as well as empathy. And there's so much more that needs to be said. So we are moving over now to the Q&A session. Like we mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, that you can make use of the Q&A section of this of Zoom to send in your questions, and we will attend to it as soon as we see them. So our panelists will still be addressing key issues as we move on, although they have very little time to do that because of our time as well. So you can quickly drop the questions while our panelists return to speak to some key issues that we will be raising with each and every one of them. I'll begin with Gilbert. In your experience, why is crisis communication more important now than ever before? Gilbert, 2 minutes, please.
Very quickly. And then if you'll allow me, Veronica, there is a question that is addressed to me as well, so I can take both of them very quickly. First of all, to say I'm extremely delighted with all the insights we've heard just now from all the panelists. Now, quickly, why is it so important? Number one, because we are in a perma-crisis situation right now. There is an ecosystem of, in a sense, that you should be ready for a crisis, particularly if you have an ambitious brand, if your organization is one that is highly visible, especially in the financial sector, like Mabel has mentioned, where crises can come from anywhere. It could be a customer complaint, it could be a customer issue, it could be a client issue, it could be an executive leadership issue. We've been involved in crisis management situations for a global brand, a global bank that had an executive involved in a security situation in Mozambique, for example. So the issues are not even geographically limited to the areas where you operate. They can crop up from anywhere. Secondly, right now we have a lot of global conversations that people are relating to brands. For instance, we saw during the EndSARS crisis where some banks were, they mentioned this, some banks were caught in the crosshairs of that conversation. Recently, for example, here in Kenya, during the protests by the Gen Z, by the Gen Zs, the main telecom company was accused of having disconnected internet during the process of the young people protesting, and that company has since suffered significant impact, a significant impact on its brand value and brand reputation. So to drive the point home that right now crisis communications is not a luxury, it's not a by the way. I think Mabel mentioned this very well. It's something that you have to be ready for, and that you have to plan for, that you have to expect, and that you have to make sure that you have internal alignment for. Now, on the question that Esther asked, if you'll allow me, Veronica, where she she's asking if I could highlight some of the common pitfalls in crisis communications and how they can be avoided. The primary pitfall I've seen in many situations is the failure to calibrate and categorize a crisis properly. Sometimes I've seen oversized responses to a crisis whereby you would have, like Onyinye mentioned, a brand responding in an exaggerated way to what would be a fairly small issue, but because of their response, then it creates an even bigger issue for them online. And in other situations, I've seen situations of a crisis not being treated as seriously as it should be. So calibrating the crisis is very, very important for a brand. And that means, as Mabel said, that the assessment, the evaluation of the crisis is very critical. And that entails looking at where it's coming from, the potential impact it can have on brand value, how it can affect your license to operate, how it can affect your bottom line, not just on the short term, but also on the long term. But also you have to calibrate then the response. Sometimes the response is just internal, like in the financial sector and in other sectors. Sometimes you realize that you just have to manage the communication through your own internal customer management teams, like Onyinye was mentioning. Sometimes it's just a matter of DMing that particular customer and continuing that conversation at that point. So calibration, assessment, and making sure that the crisis is categorized well, that's very important. Secondly, being able to map your stakeholders extremely accurately can't be overstated. This is something that I've again seen many brands not doing very well enough. So categorizing the primary stakeholders, the internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, all this becomes very critical, because the information in the channels you'll use for your customers is not the same you'd use for your employees. It's not the same you'd use for your executive teams and your shareholders. So these are just two or five of the key critical things I think have to be done right if the response is to be accurate. Back to you, Veronica.
Right. Thank you so much, Gilbert. Structuring your communication strategy to address each level of persons you are servicing is critical. Right, the next question goes to Mabel, and we'll have to give you an extra time because there's also another question for you, Mabel, in the Q&A section. Now, my question here is, how important is cross-departmental coordination in executing a successful crisis communication plan? And what strategies do you use to ensure all teams are aligned? That's the first question. When you are done answering this, I'll ask the next question in the Q&A box.
Okay. Thank you for that, Veronica. I think I mentioned it during my presentation where I spoke about the importance of working with other departments in the business. And I will use my role as an example where you have a particular crisis that you need to manage. What you do is you analyze the impact or what department is being impacted internally by that crisis. And the next thing you do would be to engage to understand the true picture. I've done this over time, and it has worked. You must be able to get an understanding of the true picture from the internal, the departments that is in question. Once you're done with that, you can then begin to look at the other external impact, who is being impacted, what are the damages, what does the law say, what would media say, what would be the affected people say. But it is very, very important and very, very critical that as communication expert, you cannot treat crisis communications in silos. You cannot do that. Yes, you operate in that space where you have an understanding of how to manage it. You have an understanding of the tools to deploy. You have an understanding of the process, of the messaging, of all of that. But the engagement with the interdepartmental, the units in your business, in your organization, it is very, very important. Because what it does for you, it gives you a clearer picture of what the crisis is. It gives you an understanding of even diving into the impact to the affected audience from your customers, employees, and the likes. So it is something that you must engage in before you even jump into managing your crisis.
Right. Now, the second question rather, is could you elaborate on the role of social media in the banking sector crisis communication strategy? How do you manage real-time feedback from the public?
Okay, so social media, it's a devil that you can't run away from, right? Because you're dealing with customers who have access to these platforms. I mean, it's their money that you're talking about. So the first thing is they want to quickly jump on that tool that they have access to share their message or to communicate. And I'm going to be practical here, using one crisis that I've managed. So there was a time when an individual went on social media to complain that our money has been wiped out from our account. On a normal day, your funds can't be wiped out from your account without somebody having access to your account. It is not possible. I mentioned earlier that one of the things that I love about this industry is the fact that it is regulated. It's not an industry where anything goes. So it is very, very transparent, right? And then the first thing, the person tagged us, and then they looked at it like, okay, engage internally to understand. Can you please check what exactly the thing is? Blah 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 blah. And not knowing, I mean, to the audience, to the external people, what truly happened was this individual wanted to purchase a car that is being sold. I mean, let me use them numbers as an example. So a car that is being sold for maybe 40 million naira, and then you got a seller who says they're going to sell it for you at about 15 million naira. I mean, the first thing you should look at is a 40 to 15 million naira car. How real is that? Not knowing to her that she's going to be defrauded. And then she immediately, by herself, transferred her money, because in transferring some money, you have different authentication that you need to do, from your logging into your platform, providing your email addresses, your username and all of that, your pins and everything. And one of the reasons why in the financial industry, we would constantly communicate that you don't expose those things to third party. So she transferred the money, and then it was after maybe an hour or 30 minutes, she discovered that she couldn't reach the person again. She was trying to call the person, and the person wasn't answering. And at that point, she realized that she's been defrauded. The first thing the person should do would have been to reach out to the bank, or to see, oh, can he still be stored? Can he still be lean? I mean, can the account be lean or something? And the person went on social media, and just to show you the power of social media, because the first thing is the person that came on social media is the person that you will listen to. The person was just talking, money has been defrauded. And the other question we're then asking, what exactly defrauded? How was your money moved? Because you needed to also provide that information. But because from where I see it, the first thing I did was, okay, please, can we first check? And we discovered that she transferred the money to the person's account into another bank. What we did was to engage that bank. There are platforms where you can engage bank engagement so the two accounts was linked, but then your fund can't be released back to you without you taking the legal process. Then she was called, she was contacted to share that. I mean, we then engaged. You were the one who did this. But if you want your money back, you have to go legal way. You have to do the police engagement. So she had to do all of that. All of this thing that I'm saying is just to let you know that the power of social media. However, if not that we took our time to understand what exactly happened, one, she probably would have lost the money. And sincerely, there is nothing the bank would do. Because you transfer the money yourself. The first thing you should have done would have been to reach out to even find out what can be done. But because as an organization, as a bank that would typically put the customer first in trying to, we say we are with you all the way just to be able to manage you. So we took up that responsibility to be able to lean the account. And at the end of the day, she got her money back. But she needed to do all of this. Just to tell you the power of social media. But then an individual needs to understand that, yes, we have access to social media, However,
Right.
proper engagement needs to be done to be able to get the desired result.
Absolutely. I agree with you on that. Okay, let's quickly move over now to Edward. The next question is for you. You also have a second question that you would respond to after you're done with this first one. It says, in today's digital age, misinformation spreads faster than ever. What specific strategies can organizations implement to not only counter misinformation during national crisis, but also to build and maintain public trust through their messaging?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I think this is one question I always like because it has a public sector element to it, and I think like I mentioned in my slides, you have to first of all understand that crisis. Lawyers face this thing a lot. People say, and I think it's across Africa. People say, "Oh, why do I need a lawyer? I'm not going to commit a crime." Or they pray even and say, "Oh, may God not let me be in a situation where I need a lawyer." Insurance companies too, insurance companies too have a lot of that problem with them, which is that people say, "Oh, am I praying for something bad to happen? Why do I need insurance?" and stuff like that. And I think it's important for brands and organizations to also look at crises like that. You can't pray yourself out of crisis. You can wish it away. You understand? Crisis will happen whether you create it or you do not create it. So very, very important. I think in answering that question is your strategy has to be proactive crisis management. That's the best thing. You need to prepare for crisis. You need to like one of the things we do for our clients is like we do scenario planning. We create scenarios. Some of them are never even going to happen. Some of them are not even realistic. But we just create those scenarios and say, in case something like this happens, what do we do? What are the steps that we need to take? What are the olden statements? What's the crisis response team? Like we just make sure that things are prepared for a situation such as that. And another thing that you also need to do, which of course is also part of proactive crisis management, is I think it's important to be relationship focused, build relationships as much as possible. And I'll use an interesting case study. I use them a lot. I use them a lot in my trainings. There's a company in Nigeria called PiggyVest. It's a fintech product. And what PiggyVest has been able to do over the years is quite interesting. Like they've built trust with their audience. They've built like I use them. So there's constant communication. They have different kinds of communicating with you, videos, blog posts, social media content that makes them very, very relatable. Almost like they're your friends. They understand. And they're very relatable. They're almost like you can touch them and feel them. And that has helped them a lot of times in managing crisis. I've seen a couple of times when someone has come on Twitter, or is it X now, has come on social media and tried to create a crisis for PiggyVest by saying, "Oh, something happened to my money, this. I tried to log into my PiggyVest account, it didn't open," and then they're trying to cause a crisis. And what always happens is that other customers, not the brand now, other customers then come and respond to the person and say, "Oh, no, 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 no. I've opened my own. It's working. You need to do this. You need to do that." Like it's just a perfect example of how they've used engagement and relationship with their customer to manage prices proactively. And I think it's
Great,
something that organizations and even those in the public sector can learn from.
great, great. So the next question quickly, what tools or platforms do you recommend for real-time monitoring and response to misinformation during a crisis?
Okay, so I think I mentioned it earlier, but of course, I always assume that businesses a lot of times want to cut costs. So I'll mention the ones that are paid, and then also I always say sometimes it's just the community manager or the brand communications team just being proactive on social media. You understand? Sometimes all you just need to do is to monitor what is being said. When a notification comes in, don't ignore it, look at it and be sure that it is not something that could become problematic. But apart from that, there are other platforms like I think another free tool that you can use is Google Alerts. Of course, Google Alerts doesn't monitor social media, but it does monitor what else is being said about you on Google crawled pages. So Google Alerts also very important. You can use like for instance, you can just put your name as Google Alerts. If something around your name comes up or your brand comes up, you just get an alert and you know how to respond to it. But when it comes to paid versions, there are Brand24 and some other platforms like that that you can use to monitor sentiment as well.
All right. Before I come over to you, Onyinye, let me quickly bring Gilbert in to answer this question that is in the chat box. It says, how do you manage and respond to crisis that involves the loss of life?
Well, any crisis that involves something that tragic has to involve a lot of empathy. You have to be extremely clear that you recognize that kind of effect that it has on the person or on the community that has incurred this kind of loss. So there is a messaging framework we call the 3 R's, which is regret, reason, remedy, whereby you always have to acknowledge that particular impact because of just how significant it is. So that's where empathy comes in. And I've seen that many brands, especially in Nigeria and in other parts of Africa, don't really feel like regret is a good idea because it feels like they're admitting something. But regret doesn't always have to entail admitting culpability, just focuses on empathy and empathizing with the people who have incurred that kind of loss. And also on the storytelling side, you also have to be very keen to contextualize what we call the 3 V's. And like Edward does, this is something we do in a lot of the simulations we do. And the 3 V's basically stand for victim, villain, and vindicator. And sometimes in situations where you have that kind of damage at a personal level, at a community level, your storytelling has to be at a very sophisticated level. You have to be able to contextualize well your brand so that you position it as the brand that is the vindicator in the story and not necessarily the victim, and contextualize the victim well as the villain in this particular case, because most of the times you will be targeted to be the villain, and that's the worst case scenario for your brand. So you need to apply all the techniques and all the planning that we would go through during such simulations and plans. Back to you, Veronica.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Gilbert. I'm coming to you now. Your question, you also have a second question, so we'll have to give you about 4 minutes to address both questions. The first is, how do you ensure that a brand's online messaging during a crisis remains consistent across multiple digital platforms?
Hello, thank you, Veronica. Ensuring that the messaging is consistent across all channels is simply by cross-checking, ensuring that whatever messaging is going out has been thoroughly checked. Also, it's great when internally people know who has been delegated to respond. Now, not everybody is to respond. Messaging comes from one channel, response to crisis comes from one channel, and when that person is as opposed to channel from a group of people who have been delegated to respond to the crisis, it's coming from them. All responses come from them. And before they put the messaging out on every social media platform, it has been cross-checked and it is the same. The website can say something that is different and your social media says something else. It shouldn't happen. All messaging should be cross-checked internally before being put out. Or emails, everything that is going out to different stakeholders should be cross-checked internally before being put out. That's the only way to ensure messaging is intact, or it's the same across all platforms.
All right. Now, Mabel Boateng is asking this question. She says, how can PR team leverage influencers or key opinion leaders to support their messaging during a crisis?
Okay, thank you so much for this question. I like the way you used thought leaders as well in the questions and not just influencers. Back to when I started my presentation, I noted what PR means, helping to build an image, a reputation for a brand. Now, since you already know that it's a reputation you're trying to fix, since you already know that it's the use of influencers in this state is to fix a reputation, it's important that the influencers that you are using align very closely with your brand, align very closely with your industry, and align very closely with, they can speak to the crisis. You cannot just use any influencer. You have to strategically pick the influencer that can best communicate that message on behalf of your brand. Number one, on behalf of your brand, the best on behalf of your brand, the best that aligns with the audience, and the best that aligns with the crisis. The person who can speak the most, the person who is most respected, who can speak to that crisis and who would be heard. That's the best way to pick influencers, or to use influencers to navigate crisis, or to give our messaging during crisis. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Onyinye. Quickly, I'm coming back to you now, Gilbert, and that will be the final question. Quickly, how can organizations prepare themselves to respond swiftly and effectively when a crisis arises?
Please come again. How can organizations prepare
themselves? That's for
themselves?
Gilbert. It's for Gilbert.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Veronica. But Onyinye, please, if you, I think you can always add on what I'm going to say. The first thing would be what I mentioned earlier, which is first build a culture of safety, what we call psychological safety within the organization, because crises sometimes are seen by someone within the organization before they actually happen. And I think in the case of B2C companies like financial institutions, this is very true. Sometimes customers will communicate to their relationship managers, to the people working on the floor in the banking institution, and sometimes this information just never gets anywhere. So my biggest investment, or the recommendation I make for the biggest investment, would be having a crisis-friendly corporate culture. Secondly, it would be obviously to do what everyone has been recommending today, which is don't treat this like just an accessory, like something you can just activate when a crisis happens. No, right now, crisis is the new normal. We have a polycrisis world. We have a perma-crisis ecosystem. We have a 24/7 news and content ecosystem. And not only that, there is the added problem of misinformation, underinformation, and disinformation. So because of that, there has to be a very strong framework within the organization, which means that the corporate comms professionals within the organization should no longer be just for sending out press releases, but should be in the decision-making table, because today that is the imperative for leadership, and there is no other choice, no other option for anyone. Everything else will flow from that prioritization, in my view, because once that prioritization has been made, I feel like all the other things we've been talking about here will be possible. Otherwise, if that prioritization doesn't happen at a leadership level, I don't really think that anything we are saying here will ever be implemented, because the resourcing will not happen and the execution will not happen.
Absolutely. And that's a fine place to leave this conversation that we have had today. Thank you so much, Gilbert. Another quote from Gilbert: crisis is the new normal. And I believe that is something that industry leaders should always remember as they go forward from here. I believe that our capacity has been built or expanded as much as possible. Few key takeaways from this: we must have at the back of our minds that brand trust is key. And so we must ensure that we do not shy away from the fact that crisis is the new normal and should be a part of whatever strategy we are putting in place. Have restructure or structure your communication in such a way that you get across to every person, every client you are servicing, be it a customer or the board of trustees, whoever they are. You must structure your messaging such that it is clear and it is transparent, and they understand what is going on. Another one is there must be constant communication as much as possible. And then you must also ensure that you take responsibility. Another one is that you must be the one that drives the narrative in this age where we have misinformation, disinformation, underinformation, fake news, and every other thing that we know is, hampering the whole system as it is right now. Thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of these webinar. We do have one conversation was stick and reaching, and that you can, go back to our YouTube page where you can get this webinar and you can watch from start to finish, so that in case you forgot or anything, or network threw you out like it did to me, you can also, catch up with any information that you missed in the course of the webinar. Thank you so much, our panelists, for sharing insightful perspectives to all of this. Thank you, Gilbert. Thank you, Edward. Thank you, Mabel. Thank you, Ninye. Thank you, Newmark Nigeria, for putting this together. Thank you also to our media friends and to our friends from across Africa and West Africa, East Africa. I saw Mabel Agiapo. I hope I got your name right, but then I just saw some names and I knew that they were not Nigerian. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye.